Joining us now is Democratic Senator Chris Coons of Delaware. He serves on the Appropriations and Judiciary Committees.
Senator, thank you for joining us. It's Symone. We've heard from a lot of Senate Democrats over the course of the weekend about that they're not going to support this funding. So where do things stand right now? And are we looking at a partial government shutdown here? Are Democrats going to hold the line?
Well, Symone, that's up to Majority Leader Thune, whether or not he will work with us to separate out the Homeland Security bill, negotiate some new amendments to that would prevent the sort of cold-blooded murder of Alex Preddy that happened on Saturday. Millions of people have seen with their own eyes the truth of what happened to him on a street in Minneapolis, in stark contrast to the lies told by Kristi Noem, the Homeland Security Secretary, and Dan Bovino from Border Patrol. He was legally carrying a firearm. He was not brandishing it at federal officers. He did not come to that day intending to harm others. In fact, his last words were encouraging a woman who'd been shoved to the ground by an ICE or Border Patrol agent trying to make sure she was okay. I think there is a path forward here for us to fund the rest of the government if Republicans will take it. And I think we will be advancing a discrete and clear set of things that need to be done, like body cameras, like ending masked agents. That's being worked through right now by our caucus. And I expect early this week we'll have a set of things that should be agreeable, that would make sure that federal agents are following the same sorts of rules, oversight, and transparency as state and local law enforcement does every single day.
Senator, do you think at this point that ICE can be redeemed, or do you think that ICE needs to be abolished?
Well, Alicia, we're always going to need some agency or entity that's enforcing our immigration laws. Whether ICE and its current leadership and its current status ought to continue, I think it needs fundamental reform. Whether it's called something else or it's got completely new leadership. But we will always need enforcement for the borders of the United States and enforcement for our immigration laws. But this current ICE, as Trump and the Republicans in Congress have funded it and supercharged it, is violating basic civil rights of Americans day in and day out.
You know, Senator, I think that's something that works on the minds of a lot of Americans as they look at these storylines unfolding and they see what these agents and you know, let's not forget how much Border Patrol is a part of this as well. So you have the combination of these forces coming together, and here you sit now this week trying to deal with exactly one aspect of this, how to begin to correct this situation, how to begin to rein in an agency that has quite honestly lost its mind at the insistence of its leadership. Y'all go out there and just be as crazy as hell as you want to be. But Caroline Leavitt today talked a little bit about this idea of separating that DHS funding from the broader appropriations, which Democrats are looking to do. I'd like you to listen to her for a moment. I want to chat about it on the other side.
The White House supports the bipartisan work that was done to advance the bipartisan appropriations package, and we want to see that passed. Policy discussions on immigration in Minnesota are happening, but that should not be at the expense of government funding for the American people, which would include, as you know, Alex, FEMA funding. And we are in the midst of the storm that took place over the weekend, and many Americans are still being impacted by that.
So are policy discussions on immigration happening? Are you guys involved in that? Is that the piece of this that's being negotiated, or is she just bloviating and deflecting as she went on to do with trying to get us believe that they actually give a damn about all these other parts of FEMA, et cetera, and what they're doing?
Michael, we'll have to see if there's any actual changes. If the administration comes out and says we are committed to doing this or this or this, as I mentioned, wearing body cameras for all federal agents, ending the practice of having them masked and not identifiable, driving around in unmarked vehicles, the training. We've got folks who are being deployed into urban settings who have not been appropriately trained and are clearly not being appropriately supervised. There's plenty of simple common sense things the administration could do if they wanted to de-escalate, lower the temperature, and show that they take seriously the profound and grave harm that their ICE and CBP agents have caused in Minneapolis and in other cities where they've been deployed. The best way to start would be to pull the 4,000 agents out of Minneapolis and return policing control of Minneapolis to the duly constituted law enforcement agencies of the city, county, and state.
So, but Senator, I think you are correct. But my concern is, I know people are like, here she go concerned again. Yes, but my concern is that the administration hasn't said any of that. The administration has said, they've said a fraction of things. They've said Greg Bovino has to go and hasn't even said that we haven't heard that from the president's mouth. We've heard that reported. We know that it is true that he is leaving. We've heard from the president that Tom Homan is coming, but nothing about the tactics that are being used.
Correct.
Nothing about the thousands of agents. And so are you concerned that maybe a little too much credit is being given here for these very small steps that the president seems to be taking?
Yeah, I'm not giving the president credit for de-escalating or for instituting new controls. I was simply trying to say,
but I do think others have been.
Well, I'm not. These are the sorts of things that Democrats demand. These are the sorts of things that would begin to restore some sense of decency and normalcy. We all have had a long weekend of reflecting on the tragedy, on the horror of an American, a Veterans Administration nurse, someone who's dedicated his adult life to caring for others, being gunned down in cold blood. And it will take a lot to undo that harm, that loss of trust, and that terror imposed on the people of Minneapolis and this country. So to change direction, there's a lot of work and a lot of moving to do.
Senator, we've talked a lot about reform, and I want to make sure that we talk about accountability. There's some interesting movement from your Republican colleagues. You have Senator Paul summoning a Trump immigration officials to testify after the Minneapolis shooting. You also had this tweet from Senator Bill Cassidy calling on a joint Fed and state investigation into the shooting. Your sense both of what is motivating them and if their interest in understanding these shootings can then be elevated to an interest in reform?
Look, I expect that there's Republicans who are getting calls from their constituents who've watched the same thing that I have and that my family has and that my state has over this past weekend. A small fraction of them are saying, go harder, go tougher, be more aggressive. But I think a majority of Americans are horrified by what they've seen and are demanding free and fair investigation, a thorough and open investigation to get to the bottom of the facts of what happened, that are insisting that ICE leadership be hauled in front of Congress to testify. And so if Republicans have the sense to listen, the American people are speaking clearly that they want a change in direction and they want reforms. They may not listen. They have charged full bore ahead with supporting Trump and his agenda so far on almost every issue in the last year. But this is a moment of truth for them to see whether they can find it within themselves to channel the best of America, not the worst of America. I'll remind you that it was in the first Trump term that he was persuaded to use cruelty to children as a tool of immigration policy to separate parents from their children. And that's what really turned people against their inhumane practices in terms of their efforts to enforce immigration law. This is a similar turning point in this second Trump term.
And the architect of that strategy was, in fact, Tom Homan. Senator Chris Coons, we appreciate your time and your candidness, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Symone.